Good morning. Thank you for being here so bright and early. Some of you in this room have a crazy idea. That is, that students can change the world. In fact, most of you may have this idea, and many of you have invested your personal and professional energies in this notion. And you get up every morning determined to make that happen, to make progress toward this crazy, preposterous idea. Stephen Foster Black, our keynote speaker this morning, shares this idea with you. You might say that Stephen Black is the personification of engaged learning, of that powerful idea that learners, scholars, and communities, armed with a shared purpose, can and do change the world. What an honor for us to spend the morning with him. Stephen Black is the grandson of the United States Supreme Court Justice Hugo L. Black. He grew up in New Mexico after most of his family left our city in the 1950s and 60s, following his grandfather's controversial role in civil rights decisions, including Brown versus the Board of Education. Despite growing up over 1,000 miles from here, from a very early age, Stephen has always been connected to Alabama through the legacy of his family's commitment to public service. Stephen Black received his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he graduated magna cum laude, and his Juris Doctorate from Yale Law School. Following graduation from law school, he returned to Alabama to join a Birmingham law firm. After 3 years with that firm, he was called to public service, serving for a brief time as assistant to the governor of Alabama, focusing on policy and economic development. And during his experience in the governor's office, Stephen was captured by the enthusiasm of the thousands of students he encountered when he was speaking around the state. And so then Stephen Black came to the University of Alabama and convinced the president and provost to create the Center for Ethics and Social Responsibility. And a related statewide organization also housed at the center called Impact Alabama. Through the work of the center, students are supported in developing a personal definition of moral and civic maturity. The center is dedicated to making the values and skills of citizenship a hallmark of a University of Alabama education, through authentic experiences in communities that, as Ambassador Joseph framed for us yesterday, make the conditions of others our own. Impact Alabama is a statewide service learning effort, unique nationally, a nonprofit staffed by 30 full-time college graduates who then have provided more than 3,000 college students with opportunities to participate in structured service learning projects that promote learning and leadership development. Since the center and Impact Alabama began, students and staff have provided more than 3,600 hours of service to the Tuscaloosa Pre-K initiative. Through the Documenting Justice initiative, written and produced films focused on subjects of social justice of both state and international significance, provided advanced placement for high school students throughout the state of Alabama, prepared tax returns for more than 17,000 working families, claiming $31 million in refunds and saving approximately $4.7 million in commercial preparation fees, provided comprehensive vision care to more than 155,000 children. In 2008, Black received the prestigious Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Community Health Leaders Award for his work with Focus First. This national award is given annually to individuals who demonstrate creativity and commitment in addressing society's most pressing health issues. 10 recipients were chosen from among 800 nominations. The Birmingham News says of Stephen Black, "Black is bright and energetic, and he speaks persuasively on such broad issues as tax, constitution, and education reform. Black exhibits a new spirit of leadership that Alabama desperately needs. And from the Tuscaloosa News, Stephen Black could be the template for what people envision when they talk about the best and brightest. Energetic, brilliant, articulate, Black is the brightest hope for the future in Alabama. What I predict you will say about Stephen Black is, wow, amen. Dear colleagues, it's my great honor to present Stephen Foster Black.
Thank you, and what an incredible introduction. That sets the bar way too high. Have you been hearing the news releases from both presidential campaigns? They're all so worried about underperforming. They're each acting as if they're going to be lucky to make it through with complete sentences. That's the way I feel after that introduction. And I will say, do you all sort of see, it's kind of funny how incredibly well educated this room is, and no matter how far along we move through our educated life, you all avoid the front row like a group of third graders. Why does that happen? Still. This is what I want to do with this short period of time, and I'm going to talk fast because I've got a lot to say to you all before my time is up. I think, at the risk of saying things that we all know, I still think it's worthwhile to step back every once in a while and go back to the reason why any of us do any kind of work tied with universities relating to communities. There are so many talented and educated people in the room that I think there's a risk that we get so enthralled and develop such an expertise and focus on one specific area that I don't think it's a bad idea every once in a while to lift our heads up and stand back and breathe deeply and acknowledge again why the overarching reason for all of this is so fundamentally important. And I would suggest to you the reason for colleges to care about citizenship, for universities to have it matter to them that they're entrusted with the lives of young human beings who are growing into adults with either a moral and ethically engaged life in front of them or not. I don't think there's ever been a time where there's a greater call on universities and us as members of university communities and community partners who partner with universities to be thoughtful about the picture we find ourselves in. When I say the picture we find ourselves in, I would argue to you all, we face a bigger challenge right now in regards to the future of ethical, engaged citizenship than at any time in our country's past. Literally, I mean that. I think the biggest single challenge confronting ethical progress, and let me be clear, because I know there are a lot of academics in the room. I'm defining progress in as general a way that everyone can agree on the definition, meaning a non-ideological definition. The idea, as corny as it sounds, a conception from our founders, the idea of an America, a country worth dying for, that gives you the right and the liberty and the privilege of caring about your children, working hard in your avocation, having some sense of commitment to your community, and based on those ingredients, having a rational expectation that your children will realize a better life than you, and your grandchildren a better life than them. And that has, in fact, been what I refer to as the transcendent trajectory of progress of our nation. This incredible experiment in democracy, as messy as it is, and freedom and justice. I think the biggest fundamental challenge to ever come before us is here right now, live and in living color in a way we've never seen before. A bigger threat than terrorism, a bigger threat than another banking crisis, although that would be bad. A bigger threat than a double-dip recession. I shouldn't have said that. Bigger than that, I think, is fundamentally what happens to a nation of citizens who 5-year increments you can measure year after year after year become less and less personally engaged with people unlike themselves. Sort of Robert Putnam moving forward, a whole body of scholarship and concern over what happens in an increasingly competitive world economy where more Americans and All kinds of Americans are working longer than they ever have before, at least trying to find the hours to work longer than ever before. And when you couple that with the demographic changes, which I still think the majority of Americans don't have any sense of the challenges to citizenship that comes with becoming a majority suburban nation. 15 years ago marked that point for us. The first time in our history, a majority of us now live in the suburbs, which technically speaking means what else have we added on to our daily burden in addition to longer work hours for average Americans than ever before? Commuting, the drive goes up. There are some jobs in the suburbs, but the majority of them are not. The majority of Americans suburbanizing further and further out to realize their understanding of the American dream by buying a home with a lawn and some trees puts them on the highway more and more hours every year. There were articles written 15 years ago focusing on Atlanta as the longest average daily highway commute in the Western world. And it was referred to as the revolt of the commuters. These beautiful loft projects coming up in downtown Atlanta. We've got some great ones in Birmingham. There's some cool loft projects downtown Tuscaloosa. Beautiful story, statistically an anomaly. We continue to be a more and more suburbanizing nation. If you lay a demographic track over the highway system of America, you'll see Americans continuing to segregate themselves in $30,000 to $40,000 a year income brackets along the highway systems of America, spending more and more time in the car, more and more time at work, and less time engaged in relationships with people unlike themselves, specifically in relationships aimed at causes and purposes beyond their own family's immediate needs. Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Clubs, 4-H, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts of America, PTA, every one of those organizations have two things in common. One is they've had a dramatic impact on engagement and concrete results across generations in our nation. And two is they've all declined dramatically in the last 2 generations. And you think to yourself, PTAs, far fewer mothers are showing up for their children's PTA meetings than they did 30 years ago. Do our mothers these days, they just don't care about their kids? They don't want their schools to thrive? And as I know you all have in your head, no, idiot, that's not it. It's because they're working, and in fact, you would be right. My suggestion was wrong, and in fact, the vast majority of women are working every hour they can find, and most of them would love to be at their school's PTA, but first and foremost, they want to feed their children. And I think that's an understandable perspective to have. But it also brings us into a situation where, as I suggested, fewer and fewer of us are engaged in projects beyond our own immediate needs in relationships with people unlike ourselves. And as I argue to college students all over the state, and when I travel to other states, whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think the founding idea, the building block, the core of ethical citizenship, the ability to decide things well on behalf of other human beings, the ability to invest your own time and talent to the betterment of a community or a society, is compassion, and not as a soundbite, as an idea that you as a human being develop or that fails to develop within you that allows you the gift of seeing through someone else's eyes, of being able to feel what it would feel like to lead someone else's life. Now, I think fortunately for us all, I believe it's human nature in us to have compassion if it's sparked properly by putting people in situations where they're exposed to other human beings unlike themselves in real life, vulnerable situations where they can gain insight and return to a safe place to reflect, to read about the structural basis for the situation they just witnessed, and you start to see the flames of compassion sparking. Unfortunately, statistically, it's happening for fewer and fewer Americans, and we see it play out in dramatic ways. I bet you all remember as vividly as I do, it's one of those moments that just continues to haunt your mind. You all remember Katrina coming through. I remember the images after the water broke through the levees and rose. Do you remember the images from news helicopters down? You remember the images of hundreds and then thousands over that 2-day period holding up signs, help, drop food, need water? Thousands and thousands. The semester after that, I took a sociology of religion course at Emory, just for the fun of it. I don't have any, I swear way too much to follow a ministry career. I was over there, and the professor brought a survey, a 3-night national phone survey, that week. It was fascinating to read. Perspectives on all sorts of issues. We're turning through this thing, and we get to a page, and one of the questions is, it described the images I just described to you, from the helicopter down. And it said, did these images sadden you? And one of the students across from me, an African-American PhD student, very tuned in, noticed the breakdown by answers by race. And you look at the black column, it was 99%, which in my mind, I think the 1% didn't hear the question right. Of course they were saddened at the images, 99% of African-Americans. 54% of white Americans. Next question, did these images anger you? 99% of African-Americans. 52% of white Americans. A little bit of awkward silence in the room at this point. She throws the paper down, crosses her arms, and she says, do you see? This is a racist, cold country. And I remember thinking, yeah, there are racists walking around, but I don't think it's that 48% in that poll. I think that's something different. And I raised my hand reluctantly, sort of, and I started explaining, and the professor added more, and we decided to do more research over the next week and come back, and we came back, and partly through anecdotal, you may have seen some of these conversations on cable news, partly from more structured focus group research in the following week, it became clear what was being measured in that initial poll. It turned out, which I think was an important wake-up call for America at the time, that a considerable majority of white, educated, middle and upper income, suburban, God-fearing Americans saw that scenario unfold, and for many of them, if they were being honest with you, had this in mind. Of course I feel bad for those people. I mean, I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't want to see anyone die, but let's be honest. I saw that damn storm rolling through the Gulf of Mexico 4 days earlier. My cousins drove to Birmingham. I have friends in New Orleans. They were in Dallas 2 days before the storm came in. I feel bad for those people, but they could have taken a little bit more personal responsibility, planned ahead, and drove out of town. If someone tell me the factual problem with that, it turns out that millions of Americans, the majority of them working at least 40 hours a week, don't have cars. And I remember walking out of that class thinking, that's so fundamentally a failure of college if we can't have our students leave with a higher education degree in a state like Alabama where at that point they're better educated than 90% of the state without a basic factual awareness of what it is to live like the majority of Americans live, which right now is paycheck to paycheck with negative savings, higher credit card debt than ever before, and for millions of Americans without a car. And without being partisan or name-calling, I feel like those images came to my mind a couple weeks ago with a recently popularized, not just from a presidential candidate, but a recently popularized conception of a lazy 47% who doesn't pay taxes, and it becomes easy for anyone who pays taxes to dismiss them and not have to consider any of the details or the life circumstances, because it certainly is easier to think these are people who don't care, they don't pay, they don't take responsibility for themselves. It's a little bit more shocking when it's a candidate for the presidency of the United States, but I think it also goes wherever you're Republican or Democrat, whether you go back to Reagan's thinking or either one of the Bushes or President Clinton, to acknowledge that 20% of them are seniors on fixed income who have been paying into the system their entire lives, and 60% of the remaining portion are working as many hours as they can find, most of them full-time, receiving the Earned Income Tax Credit, which President Reagan doubled because until 3 months ago, there was bipartisan consensus across the nation that a morally responsible nation supports low-income families based on their willingness to work and make that work pay. Regardless of ideology or who you think should be president, the bare facts of the life lived by the majority of Americans is something that I think is immorally left out of higher education, if it is. And I tell you in this room, thinking about engagement, and it's not enough to lecture about it. I can speak to 600 college students and put on the chalkboard every category that America is 1, 2, or 3 in the industrialized world, and it's a bunch of categories. We are in a blessed nation. Self-made millionaires, self-made billionaires, copyrights, patents, women's access to higher education, women's access to entrepreneurial ownership opportunities. What a beautifully free, productive, wealthy, advanced nation. But also on the list, it deserves some thoughtful time to consider the infant mortality rate, which in the last 3 years has put us in 28th, moving down 2 places from 26th. 27 other nations in the industrialized world with a lower infant mortality rate than us. The state you're in right now with between a 20 and 25% functionally illiterate adult population. And I say that intellectually to students, and if they want to memorize it, they will, but I know what they're thinking. I know they're thinking to themselves, 20% illiterate. Gosh, we got a lot of lazy, dumb people around. And sometimes a hand will go up and someone will say, 20%, I don't think you're lying to me, but where are they? And I feel it's very important to let them know they're all around you. I promise you, you're seeing one a day at least. There's a lot of complicated nuances that go into literally growing up into an adult in America, sometimes graduating from public school, functionally illiterate. But I assure you, for the vast majority of them, laziness isn't anywhere in the building, and most of them have been working every job they can find since they were 15. Now, community engagement, service learning, the scholarship of engagement, taking seriously the role of ethical developers by connecting colleges and universities to communities of all different kinds in a meaningful, respectful. I think that's beautiful. I want to add one other part to that. So I don't know if any of you have been having this thought in the last several years of celebrating this young generation for being charitable. We have, in America, regardless of ideology, I think anyone would admit, we have problems in our healthcare system. Most people agree it shouldn't be okay to have 48 million people without health insurance, that the vast majority of families below the middle not receiving primary care, and very few children seeing pediatricians at all. And it occurred to me 9 years ago, vision care is one aspect of that failure. There's not a state in the country that any of you are from who comprehensively provide vision care to children before they get to public school. The reason being, you can't find them in very big numbers until they get to public school, so it makes it a lot more expensive and unwieldy. And it occurred to me 8 years ago, aha, what a beautiful fit for service learning. Let's see how serious campuses are about committing to changing things in their communities. This is doable, long term. So in the first year, I convinced 7 beautifully engaged, thoughtful professors to make vision screening part of their course. And I hired 2 college graduates for $1,000 a month to defer law school to help start this. And we got $4,000 cameras that take pictures of children's eyes. And we went to low-income daycare centers and Head Starts, and we screened in the first year 4,600 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds in Alabama. And 12% of them had an eye problem that no one had diagnosed. We started building a network of eye care professionals who agreed to see them for free if they didn't have insurance. Most of them we could enroll in all kids. That was 8 years ago. Last year, with a staff of 30 employees and 20 campuses around the state, we screened 33,000 2- and 3-year-olds in 1,100 low-income daycare centers in all 67 counties of one of the poorest states in America. The entire thing is done by people under the age of 23. No state in America has this. And it's all campus-based, and the majority of them end up in a classroom thinking to themselves, I love what I've just done. That's pretty cool. But what are we doing? We need to engage 18-year-old volunteers to provide basic vision care. Why? Because it's the 3-year-old's fault they don't have a pediatrician? We literally found 14 kids last year with cataracts in one or both eyes. Be permanently blind within 2 years. But we have, the way you have on your campuses, a generation of 19 and 20-year-olds who will set their alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning, pick up that camera, drive it into a rural county, to find a daycare center that you can't see on MapQuest that's sitting in the living room of a trailer where 6 kids are sitting on the floor, to set that camera up, to take pictures of their eyes because they believe in their gut those kids deserve health care like any other kid. Now, I love that experience for our students. But I'll tell you, we have a documentary film initiative. There are journalism initiatives on this campus that do this beautifully. There's another side to the growth of engaged learning and scholarship and collaboration. That is the last thing I want to mention. That's not just service providing based. I would argue to you one of the biggest challenges facing public education in America moving forward, in particular in low-income communities, is not just the technical challenges of doing it well, which are expansive, but is the lack of belief of the majority of Americans that low-income children can learn at all at a high level. That at a certain point it feels irrational to hear the same conversation decade after decade and see money poured into something that doesn't change. I get that feeling. I've heard it from people honestly giving it to me. I promise you the majority of Alabamians don't see the high-end result anyone is talking about, hopefully. And the most angering thing that happens is in Alabama, those of you who don't know, we have 4.5 million people in the state. We have 11 last year, what are referred to as torchbearer schools. That's a high poverty yet high performing school. So on the one hand, you think to yourself, are you kidding me? There are 4.5 million people in the state. You're telling me there's only 11 schools in low-income neighborhoods that are doing a good job? That's a disaster. And I would say to you, you're right. That's a disaster. But I think it deserves to be seen from the other side as well. There are 11. There's E.D. Nixon Elementary School in Montgomery, which has 99% of the kids on free or reduced lunches. 85% are from single-parent households. 5 years ago, it was on a state takeover list. Their 4th graders were scoring in the 14th percentile, and a new principal was hired, a special woman. 32 teachers in E.D. Nixon Elementary School. Anyone who knows anything about Alabama, we have a strong teachers union. It's hard to fire teachers. 22 of her teachers were replaced within 2 years. And people ask her, how did you do that in Alabama? I made it so miserable for them to be in my building. Most of them left on their own. So they didn't buy my story. It reminded me of Nick Saban. She said, they didn't buy my story and they wanted to get out. What was your story, ma'am? Every child in the building will learn at a high level. It's our responsibility. If you don't believe that from every fiber of your being, get out of my building. And she said, I use stronger words than that. And literally 4 years later, she gets acknowledged in her school as a torchbearer school. Her 4th graders' reading scores are in the 88th percentile, which is 2 points higher than the state average, 2 points higher than Prattville Middle School, which is a suburban, fast-growing area where the schools have filled up with families who are leaving her school to get into better education. I promise you, if I read that scenario as a paragraph in the Walmart parking lot in any suburb in our nation, and I read to them the story and I said, true or false? I think the vast majority of Americans would say, come on. That didn't happen. I know the majority of Alabamians would say that. There's a school in Mobile called George Hall Elementary School where literally they had to raise money 2 years ago to build a shower because 1/3 of their students don't have running water every day of the month. They're 2 points higher than E.D. Nixon's elementary school. They're blowing the roof off the building, and as you can imagine, it's important to know what's happening in these schools. These are special principals and incredibly hardworking teachers, and there's no one silver bullet. I would trade 10% of the volunteer hours from students at Alabama to put them on a bus and to drive them to some of these schools. So their experience with service and engagement and ethics just isn't about being charitable to the poor kids who are failing, but they're provided a concrete visionary experience into structural prophetic change, and not just because white college students are helping out, but because talented principals and teachers are turning schools around. That's what I call documenting justice. The side of service learning that lets you go volunteer, lets you make a difference in a malfunctioning school or a library, but also gives you the context to learn about the visionary, prophetic moves forward in all realms of policy that are taking place every day all over the country. I'm so proud to be in this room. I can't imagine a higher calling than being involved in this cultural shift in the way universities define their obligation to help young people define their obligation. There has never been a more important time to be part of this conversation. I don't care if anyone is Republican or Democrat or Libertarian, there is not a monolithic block of 47% who don't care. And it becomes immoral for us as college-educated Americans to not make sure young people have personal, visceral, real experiences and relationships to experience the humanity across culture and across neighborhood and across class. Thank you all for letting me speak to you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this incredible conference.